Hey everybody, here is the truth on what's going on with the impeachment inquiry. And to help us with that truth, I have Representative John Ratcliffe from Texas 4, that is Northeast Texas. John, thank you for being here. You're an expert on this. You're on the Intel Committee, you're on the Judiciary Committee, and you're a former U.S. Attorney. You've been very outspoken about this entire process. I think it's safe to say you know what's been going on. So as we try to unravel this great mystery that is the impeachment inquiry, it's confusing to people. Let's just be honest, it's confusing. Before we get to, I want to ask you the legal definitions of these terms: quid pro quo, bribery, extortion, and why they went there, and an obstruction of justice, because that's another one that they're throwing out now. Before we get to that, though, we have to take a couple steps back and ask the question, because the Democrats' case lies on this assumption that you could never ask about the Biden-Burisma relationship. And that's always been hard to swallow for me. What I've argued is, listen, it's actually in the interest of the American public to know whether a former vice president was engaged in what is possibly corrupt, but definitely a conflict of interest with the Ukrainians. I mean, you have Hunter Biden, who's on this board, who's not qualified for, getting paid lots of money. It's a corrupt oligarch. It was being investigated by a Ukrainian prosecutor who Joe Biden then wanted to get fired, and he would withhold U.S. aid to get him fired. And nobody seemed to care about that. And maybe that prosecutor should have been fired. I don't argue that, but there was a clear conflict of interest there. And you gotta wonder, why is it wrong for our current president to ask about that just because Joe Biden is talking about running for president? Wow, I mean, what an interesting case of immunity that would be. All I have to do is run against you and you can't touch me anymore.
Right.
That's an absurd argument to make.
It is, and it's the wrong position. People have to remember that the President of the United States, as a unitary executive, is the head of the entire executive branch, meaning he's the head of the Justice Department. And so when there's what you've laid out perfectly, Dan, is a prima facie case of corruption, that the Hunter Biden contract is corrupt on its face. It's in a corrupt country, it's a corrupt country, they're paying him obscene amounts of money for expertise that he doesn't have, simply because he is the vice president's son.
Right.
It is entirely appropriate for the President of the United States to ask for assistance in connection with that investigation before he releases hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid.
Right. By law, which he has to do, by the way, according to our laws we passed.
And to your point, to underscore, it would have been inappropriate had he made a request to investigate Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
Who have no connection to the Ukraine. Right.
Because they don't have a son who engaged in a contract that was corrupt on its face.
Right.
So the president's requests, his conduct on the call, are entirely appropriate, and that's why this impeachment scam, if you will, is really so inappropriate.
So let's get to the legal definitions that we're talking about. This is where you can help our viewers out a little bit. So they're accusing me of quid pro quo. What's the legal definition of that? What would have to be legally proven for bribery and for this obstruction of justice charges? All of these terms that they're throwing out.
Right. So what you saw in the call was originally described as a quid pro quo. Then you saw the Democrats shift after they did polling that people couldn't understand what that was, to briefly to extortion and then to bribery. The terms are consistent, they're similar. Essentially a quid pro quo or bribery is to solicit something of value in exchange for some action. The extortion is a little bit different because that involves a threat or use of force in connection with that. And so, essentially what the Democrats wanted to argue was that the president was demanding that these investigations take place or there wouldn't be the release of military aid. When that didn't poll well, they switched to bribery. One of the problems that has been highlighted is they didn't start using the term bribery until after every witness had been interviewed and deposed in the Intelligence Committee. So it's been confusing to people out there why they can't decide on one particular crime or another to accuse the president of. And the problem for the Democrats is because none of it makes sense to the American people. And none of it is consistent.
They've got a criminal, but they don't have a crime.
They have no victim. The president who says the president of Ukraine says, I'm no victim. But on top of that, witness after witness after witness, none of them use the term bribery, extortion, or quid pro quo to describe the president's conduct. There's no direct evidence of that. That's why this is falling apart and why independents are breaking so hard against it, because it doesn't add up.
I do want to end with this on your kind of legal understanding of impeachment, because even on the right, we have a lot of, I think, good intellectuals who would argue that impeachment is a purely political process. You can impeach for anything. If you don't like the president's tie, you can impeach. If he doesn't defend the Constitution to your liking, you can impeach. But the Constitution is rather specific about what crimes need to be met. Now, there's still some vagary there, and so it's still up for interpretation. I mean, what's your take on that? What did the founders intend when they wrote high crimes and misdemeanors, bribery, treason as potential?
Well, they were worried that it would become a political tool for the party in power, which is why they set it up for it to be difficult, and why over in the Senate it requires 2/3 to convict to actually remove, as opposed to what we do in the House, a simple majority to actually vote on articles of impeachment. But what the founders talked about was treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanors, meaning very serious conduct.
Yeah.
And so for people to want to, when I say people, Democrats want to argue that a president should be impeached over what you just said, opinions, presumptions, innuendo, a lack of direct evidence, would make our founders turn over in their grave.
Right.
If the Democrats were presenting witness after witness with direct testimony that the president said or did something inappropriate, then we'd all have to look at it differently. But that's not what this is.
Yeah.
And so they've profoundly turned the impeachment tool on its head in a dangerous way. Dan, you and I both know that at whatever point, if they proceed the way they intend to proceed under this, what a Democratic constitutional scholar called yesterday the thinnest, fastest, weakest impeachment in U.S. history, that what happens when there's a Democratic president is they're going to do something in the first month of their term where our colleagues are going to say, we think that's impeachable, and they're going to point to this moment and say, it's the same thing you did to Donald Trump. And that'd be terrible for the country.
It is. It's extremely divisive. It's ripping people apart. And that's why we're doing this video, to help, I hope, illuminate what's been going on. So, John, thanks for being here.
You bet.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.